All Indiana Politics is your premier source for Indiana politics, focusing on issues that matter to you.
I still want us to be the best in the Midwest.
We can't afford another lockdown.
Give the citizens of this country the relief they need.
Education in the state of Indiana remains priority number one.
In-depth, nonpartisan coverage.
We don't know exactly where the economy will be in January.
People are worried with good reason.
Exclusive interviews with Indiana's political leaders.
We have the resources here in the state of Indiana to care for those who are in need.
Expert analysis on critical legislation.
We need to reform those laws.
This recovery is going to take some time.
We've got to anticipate that there'll be a budget shortfall.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network.
I'm Garrett Bergquist, government reporter for Wish TV and the producer of All Indiana Politics. Voters in Indiana's largest congressional district will pick a new member of Congress this fall. Congressman Larry Bucshon is retiring after 14 years in Congress. He represents the 8th District, which stretches from the Ohio River to Terre Haute and from the southwest corner of the state almost all the way to Bloomington. 3 men are running to succeed him: Republican Mark Messmer, Democrat Erik and Libertarian Richard Fitzlaff. I asked all 3 of them for interviews. Messmer declined while Hurt and Fitzlaff accepted my invitation. Richard Fitzlaff is a small business owner and an Army veteran. He tells me Indiana voters need someone with sound fiscal and social policies. And with us now is Libertarian candidate for Congress, Richard Fitzlaff. Richard, welcome to the show.
Hi, and thanks for having me on. Pleasure to be here with you today.
So why are you running for Congress?
I believe that Indiana deserves people who are going to have sound fiscal and social policies. My policies, whether they are income tax reform, Social Security reform, or veterans care, are policies that speak to each and every Hoosier individually.
So let's start with the income tax issue. Am I correct that you want to replace the income tax system with a national sales tax system?
The fair tax would function similarly to a national sales tax. The fair tax is the only piece of nonpartisan legislation that would eliminate the payroll tax and allow people to keep more of their money in their own pocket and only spend money or only spend on taxes when they go to spend their money.
But sales taxes tend to hit people with lower incomes the hardest. How will you offset that?
It's often said that way, but when individuals are empowered with their own money and how they can invest it, how they have an investment vehicle of their choice, save it, use it for other purposes, they're more free to be able to build success. Generational wealth happens not because we put a sales tax on someone. Generational wealth occurs when we empower people to make their own decisions with their own money.
What's your plan for Social Security?
I endorse the Cato 6.2 plan. It's the only plan endorsed by both the Government Accountability Office and the Social Security Administration that they've ever seen that would allow us to stave off a financial cliff in 2030. As of right now, Social Security will be insolvent with automatic 21% rate cuts across the board in 2030. Both the Democrats and the Republicans have both gone on record recently to say that they won't touch entitlement reform. Cato's 6.2% plan takes your personal 6.2 percentage points and allows you, if you so choose, to put them in an investment vehicle of your choice, allowing you to see returns on stocks and bonds that generally tend to average 4 to 6%, or the free market, which is, even in depressionary years, 10 to 12%, as opposed to Social Security's current 1.2 percentage rate in return. In addition to that, when we look at making sure that our most vulnerable populations still have access to things that they need, survivors' benefits, the disabled, those types of folks, the employer's contribution of 6.2 percentage points would still happen, and they would continue to fund a traditional Social Security program for those at most in need.
So the national debt is now at $35 trillion.
And climbing rapidly.
And how do you plan to bring that down while minimizing the impact to people who might end up losing government services as a result of spending cuts? You know, for example, here in Indiana, we have the families of medically complex children who lost coverage under attendant care.
Absolutely. And that's a very complex situation that not only needs to look at the entitlement reform aspect, making sure that only those who are truly in need are receiving services. We don't want to leave anyone behind, but we want to make sure that fraud, waste, and abuse are reduced to almost zero, if not zero. Secondly, we look at government programs that are bloated, cost-plus contracts as opposed to fixed-price contracts. There's a number of ways that we can reduce government spending while still ensuring essential goods and services.
Ever since the Dobbs ruling 2 years ago, people on both sides of the abortion issue have been calling for a federal law either to ban access to abortion services or to ensure access to abortion services. Where do you fall on that?
I want to make it very clear to the voters of Indiana's 8th Congressional District that abortion, as much as we want to minimize the number of abortions, but that is a choice that needs to be between a woman, her doctor, and her God. It's not a role for the federal government or for the state government, for that matter.
So should there be a federal law to ensure access to abortion services, or where should the government fall on that?
As much as we'd like to minimize abortions, and I think the polling would show the same. I believe 64% of Hoosiers want reasonable access to abortion. I don't think that anyone wants it used for an advanced contraceptive, late-term abortions, live birth abortions. No one wants that. But at the same point in time, the more we focus on allowing a woman to make her own choice, whether it's for health care, personal reasons, life of the mother, life of the child, those are decisions between her doctor, and her God. And I don't want government to get involved beyond saying that as long as government's not paying for it, as long as it's a private decision, then that's not a decision for lawmakers to legislate.
We just had another school shooting last week. What would you do to prevent further shootings? We're the only developed country with frequent mass shootings.
I would disagree that we are the only developed country with frequent shootings, but at the same point in time, our Constitution is very clear that the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. What happened this past weekend in Appalachia High School down in Georgia is unfortunate, and our thoughts and prayers are obviously with the families of the victims. Thoughts and prayers don't go far enough, and I'll agree with you on that. But what we see is that we are not enforcing any of the gun laws we currently have on the books. This young man, if he's guilty, logic would say that he is, his father, they have both been known by the FBI and the Counterterrorism Division for over a year now. And yet, there are laws against domestic terrorism. There are laws against people on domestic terrorist watch lists from buying guns. We didn't enforce the laws at the federal, state, or local level down there in Appalachia, Georgia, to prevent these people from having access to firearms. Responsible gun owners, people who aren't going out and committing crimes, shouldn't be punished for the choice of bad actors and criminals.
The southern border has been one of the nation's biggest issues for the past decade or so. How would you stem the flow of migrants and drugs across that border?
Absolutely. And as much as we don't want people bringing fentanyl into this country, criminals, terrorists, we don't want people that are trafficking women and children to come into this country. We should have what we would consider a moat around our country with a wide drawbridge. Reagan said it best in the 80s with his City on the Hill speech, although never implemented, that we should welcome people to once again become the greatest country on earth. We should welcome immigrants from all walks of life, just like we did during Ellis Island, where we welcomed people from Asia, Eastern Slavic countries, Italy, the Irish people. They built and helped make this country a country that won World War II, a country that dominated the world stage, that helped lift millions of people across the globe out of poverty, and put a man on the moon. Immigrants are a fantastic thing. So it's one thing to say that we should have a staunch border security policy, and that's fine. I can tend to agree with that. We should absolutely vet them. We have some of the greatest military and FBI and Interpol and all kinds of other tools at our fingertips that we can use to vet these individuals. But if they want to come here, through an easy process that includes a very strict background check, to come in and pay taxes and to integrate into the American way of life, we should encourage that and welcome that.
That leads me to my next question. What about the legal immigration system?
I think that when we look at the immigration laws from 1792 until today, that they have oftentimes focused disproportionately on certain ethnic and racial minorities. And I think that's unfortunate in a country that prides itself as the melting pot of the world. Legal immigration needs to be reformed in such a way that we keep bad actors out, we keep those that would seek to drain our resources out, those that would seek to use force or coercion onto another person, and keep those individuals out of our country, while at the same time simplifying the process for becoming an American citizen. The Ellis Island approach worked for hundreds of years, well, not hundreds of years, but about 100 years. For the very simple fact that so long as they came here, they weren't committing crime, they were integrating into the American way of life, that we accepted them, that they paid into the system, they become productive members of society. FBI crime statistics, I'll have you know, show that 66% of first-generation immigrants are less likely to commit a violent crime than second or third-generation immigrants. Furthermore, the Government Accountability Office shows that the GDP per immigrant that comes here and integrates successfully into society grows our GDP by 3.1 jobs and over $45,000 per year.
What do you believe Congress can do to fix the housing crisis?
The housing crisis is multifaceted, and while we don't want foreign corporations or special interest groups having control over a minority in the housing market, we also need to look at regulations. Regulations and government bureaucracy right now lead to a huge problem when it comes to the housing market. And so we see that individuals are disenfranchised from being able to purchase homes for themselves and their families. And we need to reinvest in focusing on the individual being able to attain home ownership rather than corporations.
Would you support continued military aid for Ukraine?
Absolutely not. We are not the world's police. I believe that we should have a strong and robust U.S. military that protects our national interests and our borders. But I do not believe that we should use military or weapons of war, weapons of mass destruction, against civilians and innocent people to prop up regimes that we feel might benefit us economically in the long run. We need to stop picking winners and losers and start being on the right side of history.
What about aid to Israel?
Absolutely not. Again, while Israel has every right to defend themselves after the events of October 7th, 2023, the difference is, just like anyone else would have the right to defend themselves and their property under our Constitution, what you do not have the right to do is indiscriminately kill women and children, bomb schools and hospitals as retribution to get one bad actor. At some point in time, the American people need to stand up and say, what is an acceptable level of collateral damage? For me personally, that is one innocent life lost.
What do you say to people who might fear that voting for you would only ensure that one of the other major political parties wins this election?
Well, let me be clear that Indiana has three major political parties, the Libertarians, which I happen to represent being one of them. And we don't steal or take votes away from another political party. Your votes aren't owned by anyone. Your vote is your vote to give to the person who you believe will best represent you and your family's views for the next 2 years in U.S. Congress.
If you were elected as someone who is not a member of either the Republican or Democratic parties, who most likely would retain a majority in at least one of the houses of Congress, how would you be able to be a productive member of Congress? How would you ensure they wouldn't simply shut you out?
Absolutely. In such a divided U.S. Congress right now, where we see currently it's less than 10 vote majority for the Republicans over the Democrats, and it seems to flip every couple of election cycles, the major political parties, or the other political parties, would be more inclined to work with independents, to work with third-party candidates, to work with libertarians, to advance their political agenda. My voice would be actually more valuable than just being another voice in the crowd lost in a sea of over 200 Republicans or 200 Democrats. They would have to come to me and ask me to co-sponsor bills, ask me to sign on to bills. And the more that they have to do that, the more that we are able to let the voices of Indiana's 8th Congressional District be heard to push for the types of things that they want.
Richard Fitzlaff, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
That was Richard Fitzlaff, Libertarian candidate for Indiana's 8th Congressional District. You have until October 7th to register to vote if you have not already done so. Early voting begins on October 8th. And remember, you can catch All Indiana Politics every Sunday morning at 9:30, only on Wish TV. I'm Garrett Bergquist. Thanks for listening.
From Wish TV, this is All Indiana Politics Podcast on the All Indiana Podcast Network. Watch All Indiana Politics live Sunday mornings at 9:30 on Wish TV and at wishtv.com. Subscribe to this podcast and listen weekly here on the All Indiana Podcast Network. And be sure to discover even more great podcasts at allindianapodcastnetwork.com.